What is work? Why do we do it? At first, the answer might seem obvious. Work is the labor we do to earn money to support ourselves and those who depend on us. Americans really like work. We talk about it all the time. But here's the thing. There isn't some naturally existing category called work. There's just different forms of human activity that we've categorized as work and not work. In this series, we'll explore how those categories have been created and by whom. Race and gender play a big role. So does religion, because in the United States, religion is always part of the story. Welcome to Religion at Work.
Let's start with something you've probably heard of, the Protestant work ethic. 100 years ago, a sociologist named Max Weber argued that there was something unique about Protestant Christianity that inspired people to work hard and accumulate capital. Early Protestants, especially the Puritans, believed that work was a duty to God and wealth was a sign of salvation. They valued discipline and self-restraint in all things, especially money. If you were a good person, you would work hard but live frugally, and you would do it independently without burdening those around you. If you didn't work or struggled to support yourself, it meant you were a hopeless sinner destined for hell. Even though Weber's study has its flaws and its critics, he points out something that's really important in American life. We moralize work. But this series isn't about your grandmother's Protestant work ethic, because Protestant theology isn't the whole story. We're also dealing with centuries of white supremacy and patriarchy, which have entangled with Protestant ideas over time to produce the American workplace. Religion in the workplace? You might be thinking that's ridiculous. We have separation of church and state, after all. We have religious freedom. Religion doesn't belong at work. What I'm saying, though, is that it's already there and we just don't see it. Religion plays a role in how we define work, why we require it, and how we compensate it. This series argues that any kind of labor policy in this country starts with an implicitly white, implicitly Christian understanding of what work is. And that has far-reaching implications for all kinds of decisions about how we organize our society. Does reproductive labor count as work? What about other unsanctioned forms of work? What about people who are unemployed, disabled, or welfare recipients? Religion plays a role in how we answer each and every one of those questions. If you live in the United States, even if you yourself are not religious, you live and work in a society that has been influenced over centuries by religion, for better and for worse. But the good news is that we can change how we think about work, and it starts by taking a deep look at how we got here.
Imagine you're out here standing with me in this field. Look around you. What do you see? You see trees, grass, flowers, maybe blue sky and clouds. But now think for a minute, what do you not see? You don't see how mountains have risen and eroded, or how glaciers have formed and melted. You don't see how over time, wind and water have carved away the land around us into this shape that we recognize. Looking for religion in society is like looking at this field. Sometimes you're able to see things on the surface. You might see a building, a symbol, an outfit, something that you recognize as religious. But sometimes religion is much, much deeper. You have to dig below the surface, deep into society and deep into our past, in order to understand what's really there, what really gave shape to the surface we live on. Why bother? If you're going to build a house on this field, you wouldn't just come out here and start pouring foundation tomorrow. You would take time to excavate the area. You want to know exactly what is happening beneath the surface of this land because it's literally the ground you're building on. The same is true with religion. If you're someone who hopes to affect change in society, to build something, to change something, you need to understand what's going on below the surface. And part of what you'll find is religion.
In fact, once you start looking for it, you'll find religion in all kinds of patterns that teach us how to behave and how to feel. I call these patterns deep stories. A deep story is a description of the world that feels factual, like it's just universally true. But if you look closely, you can see that it's actually a description of one way the world can be. And there's someone telling that story, someone who prefers that the world work that way, and who has the power to convince others that's the way it should be. Let's start with this one. People should work. We hear this deep story from all kinds of places. Sometimes we hear people saying it out loud.
The thing that makes our nation unique is that American people work hard to provide for their families.
Sometimes it's a more implicit message in our social systems. If you want healthcare, you need to work. If you're out of work, you should be looking for a job. It's even in how we interact with people. It's really common when you meet someone to ask, what do you do? We ask children all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up? Those are questions about work. We expect that the answer will tell us something important about that person. And that's because below the surface of our society is this deep story that people should work, or they're bad people. We see that kind of moral judgment a lot in how Americans talk about work versus unemployment, especially politicians who make the laws that regulate labor. We also see it in pop culture. Someone who doesn't work is a kind of deviant. And while Americans love some deviants, the unemployed are not among them. On the surface, this doesn't seem religious. There's no reference to a specific tradition or scripture or leader, but that's just the surface. Let's dig beneath that surface and go back in American history to the era of the Great Depression and the New Deal. This is a moment when Americans were really grappling with what work means and why it matters, because so many people were unemployed. In 1933, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt asked Congress to authorize funding for a civilian conservation corps that would provide jobs to approximately 250,000 men who were unemployed. He wrote a letter outlining the plan and its costs and benefits, standard stuff, but then he closed with a claim that went way beyond Americans' financial needs. More important than the material gains will be the moral and spiritual value of such work. We can eliminate, to some extent at least, the threat that enforced idleness brings to spiritual and moral stability. Notice that he doesn't name God or quote the Bible. He doesn't need to. His audience is Congress and the American people, and they are very familiar with these kinds of moral claims about work. Where did those ideas come from? I'm so glad you asked. You see, white Protestant Christians have been concerned about this problem of idleness for a really long time. Way back in colonial New England, this was one of the key values that parents wanted to impart to their children. In the New England Primer, which was the most widely used textbook in the United States until the Civil War, young readers repeatedly encounter the value of hard work and the dangers awaiting idle children. On one page, children learning to read encounter the idle fool is whipped at school. In other stories, they read about a boy who skips school and gets lost forever in the woods, a child who falls asleep while working in the garden who gets bitten by a mouse. Basically, if you don't work, bad things happen. One story that's in almost every edition of the primer, and there are many, talks about a boy who just decides to be lazy. The devil comes along and eggs him on. Thy parents always disobey, don't mind at all what they do say. Jesus shows up and tries to persuade the boy to be obedient and hardworking. After all, that's a child's job, to go to school, learn to read so they can read the Bible, and obey their parents. At first the boy refuses, but eventually he does come around, only to find out that it's too late for him. Jesus sends death to take the boy away, and the story ends with a warning that lazy children die young and go to hell. You can hear the deep story here. People should work. If they don't, it's morally wrong and they're punished. That idea wasn't unique to Protestants. Remember that sloth is a deadly sin in Catholic tradition. But white Protestant Christians have always dominated American politics, even today. Over time, white Protestant deep stories and values have sunk beneath the surface. They're so common, so familiar, that we don't even think of them as religious. We don't think of them at all. It's just the ground that we're standing on. In the next episode, we'll look at the role this deep story played in settler colonialism and enslavement, and how it normalized incredible violence against non-white, non-Christian people. Until then, here's something to think about. Why do you work? Where did you learn what work is and why it's important? Do you feel like you have to work to be a good person? See what deep stories you can excavate in your own context, and I'll see you next time.